Do you remember Gimme a Break, 1981? The warm, chaotic sitcom that once made America laugh was hiding a much darker truth behind the scenes. Many cast members faced depression, shattered marriages, illness, and some met heartbreaking, unexpected deaths. Stay tuned as we uncover their untold stories and honor the stars we lost. Nell Carter as Nell Ruth Harper. Nell Ruth Carter was born on September 13, 1948, in Birmingham, Alabama. At 33 years old, Carter played Nell Harper, the uncompromising yet deeply tender housekeeper who anchored Gimme a Break, 1981. Her performance immediately became the emotional backbone of the series. Her personal life, however, was marked by constant ruptures that no applause could soften. Her marriage to mathematician George Kronicki deteriorated under the strain of repeated miscarriages and failed adoption attempts. By the early 1990s, the collapse of her second marriage to Roger LaRocque arrived just as diabetes and heart complications began to intensify, creating a cycle where every health setback seemed to deepen her loneliness. Those illnesses pushed her into a precarious balance between working and simply staying alive. The surgery to repair 2 brain aneurysms in 1992 left lasting fatigue and instability, and although she continued acting in Hangin' with Mr. Cooper and made guest appearances on Ally McBeal, each job required a level of strength her body could no longer reliably give. The more she tried to hold her career together, the more her health resisted. On January 23, 2003, Carter died suddenly at home at just 54 years old, her heart succumbing after years of untreated strain linked to diabetes. She was laid to rest at Hillside Memorial Park Cemetery, leaving behind her children, her unfinished projects, and an estate valued at around $2 million. Lori Hendler as Julie Kaniski Maxwell. Lori Rachel Hendler was born on April 22 in Fort Belvoir, Virginia. At 16 years old, Hendler played Julie Kaniski, the bright, book-driven middle daughter of Gimme a Break, 1981. Her calm intelligence gave the show its quieter emotional edges across 5 seasons. But while her character thrived, Hendler privately battled pressures that accumulated long before adulthood. Her marriage to Stephen Rises in 1990 brought stability, yet the painful struggle with infertility shadowed their early years together, pushing them toward adoption after rounds of disappointment. At the same time, roles dried up as casting directors locked her into the good girl image from the series, leaving her working sporadically and facing a financial strain she rarely acknowledged publicly. Projects like A New Kind of Family and later her voice work in Ferngully helped sustain her career, but they also underscored the gap between the opportunities she hoped for and the ones Hollywood was willing to offer. The uncertainty pushed her toward entrepreneurship, building a marketing business out of necessity rather than ambition. In 2025, Hendler is 60 years old, settled into a life shaped by selective voice roles, business work, and the family she nurtured through resilience. Her estimated net worth of about $500,000 reflects a career rebuilt on quiet determination. Lara Jill Miller as Samantha Sam Kaniski. Lara Jill Miller was born on April 20, 1967, in Allentown, Pennsylvania. She was 14 years old when she played Samantha Sam Kaniski, the spirited tomboy whose energy became one of the brightest sparks of Gimme a Break, 1981. Her charisma made her an instant icon for young viewers of the 1980s. Yet behind the youthful confidence was a life marked by unexpected detours. Her first marriage dissolved quietly in the early 1990s, a breakup intensified by the emotional fatigue of shifting from child star to law student to working actress. Old dance injuries, including a stubborn knee problem from years of ballet, flared during rehearsals and tours, forcing her to turn down roles at a time when she was still rebuilding her identity after leaving the legal profession. Even as her voice acting career soared, with demanding roles in The Loud House and Doc McStuffins, she carried the private weight of caring for a mother whose dementia diagnosis in 2006 restructured her entire life. She stepped back from her agency and altered her schedule, choosing projects that allowed her to remain close to home, balancing grief, obligation, and the relentless pace of animation work. In 2025, Miller is 58 years old, directing, performing, and advocating for children's arts programs while continuing to lend her voice to major franchises. Her estimated net worth of around $3 million reflects decades of steady, disciplined work. Telma Hopkins as Dr. Adelaide "Addie" Wilson. Telma Louise Hopkins was born on October 28, 1948, in Louisville, Kentucky. She was 35 years old when she played Addie Wilson, the sharp, quick-witted confidant who gave Gimme a Break. 1981, its warmth and spark. Her arrival reshaped the show's chemistry with effortless charm. Behind that brightness, her marriage to Donald B. Allen had already ended, leaving her to raise her young son alone while navigating a heavy business. The demanding schedule of bosom buddies and later the long production hours of Family Matters often pulled her away from home, creating a quiet but persistent tension between professional stability and personal sacrifice. Health concerns crept in gradually as she moved through the 1990s, with exhaustion and stress shadowing her heavier filming years. Projects like Half and Half and Are We There Yet kept her visible, but they also arrived during a period when she was beginning to acknowledge her limits and adjust her work pace to preserve what strength she had left. Even so, she continued performing, choosing roles that allowed her to balance age and energy. In 2025, Hopkins is 77 years old and still active, appearing on The Young and the Restless while mentoring younger performers who see her as a model of endurance. Her estimated net worth of about $3 million reflects decades of steady work through persistence, discipline, and a career she pieced together one careful step at a time. John Hoyt as Stanley. Grandpa, Kaniski. John MacArthur Hoyt was born on October 5, 1905, in Bronxville, New York. At 76 years old, Hoyt played Stanley Grandpa Kaniski, the irritable yet unexpectedly tender patriarch who gave Gimme a Break. 1981, its generational depth. His presence added gravity to a sitcom built on chaos and heart. His private life, however, had been marked by a grief that never fully healed. His first marriage to Marion Burns collapsed shortly after their young daughter died, plunging him into deep depression and pushed him away from acting. When he returned to Hollywood years later, the loneliness of that period still shadowed him, even as his second marriage to Dorothy Altman restored stability he had long thought impossible. Illness followed him into the decades when his career finally bloomed. Exposure to radioactive filming locations during The Conqueror haunted him with lingering respiratory issues, and by the time he appeared in Spartacus and later Gimme a Break, his worsening shortness of breath signaled the lung cancer that would eventually claim him. Still, he kept working. Finally, Hoyt died on September 15, 1991, at 85 years old, losing his battle with lung cancer in Santa Cruz, California. He was survived by his wife Dorothy, his long resume of stage and screen roles, and an estate valued at approximately $1 million. Kari Michaelsen as Kathleen Katie Kaniski. Kari Michaelsen was born on November 3, 1961, in Manhattan, New York. At just 20 years old, Michaelsen played Katie Kaniski, the sweet, hopeful eldest daughter whose innocence softened the edges of Gimme a Break, 1981. Her performance earned Young Artist Award nominations and made her a familiar face in American households. But fame arrived early, and its weight lingered long after the cameras stopped. Years of working as a teen performer left her mentally exhausted, pushing her to pause acting after the show and retreat into studies at UCLA in an attempt to reclaim a sense of control. Her relationship with pop star Andy Gibb in 1983 ended painfully as his addiction spiraled. Though brief, it left emotional marks she rarely spoke aloud. Her marriage to executive David Waldock brought a new chapter of hope and the birth of their son, Yet the strain of balancing motherhood with a career that no longer offered consistent roles gradually eroded their relationship. By the time they divorced in 2009, she was navigating single parenthood while confronting periods of depression triggered by typecasting and the career drought that followed. Gimme a break. In 2025, Michaelsen is 64 years old, focusing on speaking engagements and production work through Michaelsen Enterprises. Her seminars, shaped by decades of reinvention, remain her primary livelihood, contributing to an estimated net worth of about $500,000 that built from her persistence, resilience, and choice. Dolph Sweet as Police Chief Carl Chief Kaniski Adolphus Gene Sweet was born on July 18, 1920, in New York City. At 61 years old, Sweet played Police Chief Carl Chief Kaniski, the gruff paternal anchor of Gimme a Break, 1981. His chemistry with Nell Carter became one of the show's defining pillars through its first 4 seasons. But the family he portrayed on screen contrasted sharply with the fractured one he struggled to hold together in real life. His first marriage to Reba Gillespie unraveled after decades marked by the lingering trauma he carried home from World War II and the difficulty of raising a child. His second marriage to Iris Braun brought steadiness, yet even that stability was quietly strained by the grinding work schedule of soap operas like Another World. As Gimme a Break entered its 4th season, he began experiencing escalating abdominal pain that he initially dismissed as exhaustion. The diagnosis, stomach cancer, arrived brutally late, just as his career was finally reaching its peak. He continued filming despite the rapid progression of the disease, determined to preserve the character he loved and the cast he considered a second family. Finally, Sweet died on May 8, 1985, at 64 years old, only days before his funeral and the airing of his final episode. His ashes were scattered at sea, and he left behind his wife, his son, and an estate valued at approximately $1 million. Joey Lawrence as Joey Donovan. Joseph Lawrence Mignogna III was born on April 20, 1976, in Abington Township, Pennsylvania. At just 7 years old, Lawrence played Joey Donovan, the charming, mischievous foster son who revitalized Gimme a Break, 1981, when he joined in Season 3. His smile became an instant trademark, launching him into child star fame. But adulthood delivered storms that childhood success could not shield him from. His first marriage to Michelle Vella dissolved after rising tensions and the pressure of navigating fame while raising 2 young daughters, creating emotional distance he later acknowledged but struggled to repair. His second marriage to Chandy Yawn Nelson fractured under financial strain and years of quiet disagreements, and by the time he faced a contentious divorce in 2020, he was already worn down by bankruptcy filings, repossessed vehicles, and the humiliation of watching his income evaporate despite the success of Melissa and Joey. The turmoil followed him into his third marriage to Samantha Cope, where accusations of infidelity in 2024 triggered yet another divorce filing, only for the couple to reconcile months later after long, painful conversations that forced him to confront patterns he had avoided for years. Even as he rebuilt his career through indie films and voice work, the emotional weight of failed relationships and mounting debts left marks to him. In 2025, Lawrence is 49 years old, focusing on podcasting with his brothers and carefully chosen creative projects while keeping his private life steadier than it has been in years. His estimated net worth of about $250,000 reflects a career shaped by early fame, financial missteps, and the long road toward rebuilding both stability and self-trust. Jonathan Silverman as Jonathan Maxwell. Jonathan Elihu Silverman was born on August 5, 1966, in Los Angeles, California. At 18 years old, Silverman played Jonathan Maxwell, the awkward, sweet-natured neighbor who brought youthful charm to Gimme a Break, 1984. His energy added a new spark as the series matured into its later seasons, but the innocence he portrayed on screen contrasted sharply with the challenges that would follow him into adulthood. His first marriage quietly dissolved in the early 2000s. A casualty of long filming schedules, constant travel, and the pressures that accumulated after Weekend at Bernie's left him typecast as the likable fool. The role that made him famous also boxed him in, straining relationships and pushing him toward work that often took him far from the emotional stability he needed. His second marriage to actress Jennifer Finnegan brought new joy, yet balancing two careers proved difficult as both of them shifted between acting and directing. The pandemic years halted their projects, intensifying financial and creative pressure, even as they welcomed their daughter and built a home life that depended on careful compromise. Still, Silverman kept moving, turning toward indie films, small directing jobs, and family-centered projects. Now, Silverman is 59 years old, embracing a steadier rhythm built around his wife, his daughter Ella, and a mix of directing and character work that no longer demands the frenzy of earlier fame. His estimated net worth of around $3 million reflects a lifetime of navigating highs, setbacks, and the long, deliberate work of reshaping a career that once threatened to define him more than he wanted. Matthew Lawrence as Matthew Donovan. Matthew William Lawrence was born on February 11, 1980, in Abington Township, Pennsylvania. He was just 5 years old when he played Matthew Donovan, the sweet, wide-eyed youngest foster brother who joined Gimme a Break, 1985. His charm hinted at a future star long before Hollywood knew his name. As he grew, romance became tangled with the pressures of being a child actor drifting into adulthood. His engagement to Heidi Mueller ended quietly in 2006, the first sign that fame was beginning to cost him more than it gave. Later relationships, including his turbulent marriage to Cheryl Burke, fractured under work strain, prolonged separation during COVID-19, and unresolved emotional weight from earlier career trauma, leaving him cycling through heartbreaks even as the public viewed him as the gentle Lawrence brother. That trauma resurfaced when he revealed he had been sexually harassed by a powerful Marvel director early in his career, which not only cost him his agency, but derailed roles he had been promised. The humiliation and sudden career freeze intensified his depression. Now, at 45 years old, Lawrence stands steadier, acting selectively, singing, hosting the Brotherly Love podcast, and nurturing a quiet relationship with Chili from TLC. His estimated net worth of about $3 million comes from decades of acting, voice work, and music, a hard-won recovery from years when the industry nearly broke him. Rosetta LeNoire as Mama Maybelle Harper. Rosetta Olive Burton was born on August 8, 1911, in Harlem, New York. At 73 years old, she joined Gimme a Break, 1984, as Mama Maybelle, warm, commanding, and full of the musical soul that shaped Nell's character. Even in a single season, she elevated the show with the weight of a lifetime spent fighting for performers of color. But behind that radiant presence were decades of personal trials that shaped and scarred her adult life. Her marriage to William LeNoire collapsed in 1943, leaving her to raise their son alone while navigating racial barriers that barred her from many Broadway stages. Love returned in her marriage to Egbert Fitzgerald Brown, but widowhood found her again in 1973, forcing her to carry both grief and responsibility during years when her theater company constantly battled for funding. Diabetes stalked her quietly through those same decades, the slow, unforgiving illness that damaged her vision and drained her stamina, even as she insisted on championing diversity in American theater. By the late 1990s, she was nearly blind in one eye, but she refused to step back from AMAS repertory theater, pouring every remaining ounce of strength into the mission she considered her life's unfinished work. Sadly, LeNoire died on March 17, 2002, at 90 years old, from complications related to diabetes, leaving behind a legacy honored with a National Medal of Arts and a theater award bearing her name. Her estimated net worth of about $1 million reflected a career built not on commercial hits, but on relentless devotion to representation, community, and the performers she believed deserved a place on every stage. Rosie O'Donnell as Maggie O'Brien. Rosie O'Donnell was born on March 21, 1962, in Commack, New York. At 24 years old, she played Maggie O'Brien, the sharp, loud, fast-talking cop neighbor who electrified Gimme a Break in 1986. Her energy added a new adult rhythm to the show's final season. Her personal life, however, fractured long before the applause faded. 2 marriages collapsed under the strain of fame, activism, and her relentless work pace, first with Kelly Carpenter after 4 children, then with Michelle Rounds, who died by suicide in 2017, leaving Rosie spiraling through guilt she rarely admits aloud. Even when career highs arrived, from A League of Their Own to her Emmy-studded talk show, the emotional aftermath of divorce and the public unraveling of her daughter Chelsea's addiction arrests in 2024 to 2025 turned every victory into another reminder of how fragile stability remained. The toll landed heavily on her health. Depression, anxiety, PTSD, and a heart attack in 2012 shadowed her at every stage, resurfacing violently during political battles on The View and worsening after Trump's elections, which triggered the overload that led her therapist to beg her to disconnect. Yet she could only manage 2 hours. Even the weight loss injections she adopted in 2025 felt less like vanity than a desperate attempt to regain control of a body carrying decades of emotional shock. In 2025, at 63, she divides life between the U.S. and Ireland, writing memoirs, producing Broadway projects, and rebuilding a quieter rhythm far from the political storms she once lived inside. Her estimated net worth of $120 million reflects a career forged in volatility, resilience, and the painful cost of surviving her own history. Paul Sand as Marty. Paul Sand was born on March 5, 1932, in Santa Monica, California. At 54 years old, he played Marty, the eccentric landlord who drifted through Gimme a Break in 1986 with offbeat charm. His absurd humor briefly softened a show nearing its final bow. But marriage never came for Sand, and that absence shaped much of his adult life. As friends built families, he faced a growing loneliness that deepened when his 1974 sitcom, Friends and Lovers, collapsed after only a few months, making him retreat further into work. The emotional weight of career stumbles and inconsistent film offers pushed him into financial difficulty by the mid-1980s. He escaped collapse only by returning to theater. He brought to story theater the quiet melancholy beneath his humor. That commitment kept him working, but also widened the gap between him and the life he once imagined. In 2025, at 93 years old, he lives a peaceful retirement in California, occasionally appearing at improv workshops to recount stories of Marcel Marceau, Second City, and a lifetime built on unexpected turns. His estimated net worth of $1 million comes from decades of steady, modest work across stage and film. Ivonne Wilder as Tina. Ivonne Wilder was born on September 21, 1937, in the Bronx, New York. At 44 years old, she played Tina, the outspoken, fast-paced friend who brought social humor and sharp timing to Gimme a Break in 1981. Her presence added an edge that made Nell Carter's world feel fuller and more alive. Her private life, however, unraveled in ways the audience never saw. 5 marriages ended one after another, each leaving a deeper silence behind, with the third, her union with filmmaker Bob Keljan, collapsing even as they collaborated on The Return of Count Yorga, a project that mixed creative triumph with emotional fallout. Raising her son Chris alone while fighting a system that repeatedly typecast her as the Latina comic relief only magnified the loneliness of a woman who once stood on Broadway as part of West Side Story's original legacy. The emotional strain followed her through decades of working non-stop in television, from Room 222 to Full House, pushing her through exhaustion, self-doubt, and the quiet physical wear that comes from living inside other people's expectations. She hid most struggles behind humor, but friends noticed the toll. Finally, Ivonne Wilder died on November 24, 2021, in Los Angeles at the age of 84, with the cause undisclosed, an exit as private as the battles she carried for decades. Her estimated net worth at the time of her death was approximately $500,000, earned from acting, writing, and a lifetime of creative work. Her legacy remains tied to West Side Story, to her sharp comedic instincts, and to a resilience built through heartbreak, reinvention, and silence. As we look back at the cast of Gimme a Break, their triumphs, their struggles, and the lives cut painfully short, we're reminded that behind every laugh track was a real human story. Some found peace, others faced heartbreak, and a few left us far too soon. Their legacy continues not just on screen, but in the memories of those who grew up watching them. Which cast member's journey shocked you the most? And whose story do you want us to explore next? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another deep dive into the stories behind the stars.